All right. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited tonight to have an opportunity. I believe you're really, if you've been with me this far, you're really going to be blessed. I said this a month ago, and I said it even last week, that I think we're finally getting to the point to where we're gonna get a little bit more insights and a little bit more actual information. There's been so much of bringing all of us, trying to bring us up to speed, and of course the knowledge exists to Dolores that the mass majority of Christians will already have multiple preconceived ideas about all of these things, reincarnation and all of that stuff. And so some of you certainly, I know I did, certainly fit that category. So her assumptions, at least at large with Christians, was right. But I've had many of you tell me that you are blessed by what we're doing and sharing this information. And so we're in chapter 14 tonight, and it's the title of chapter 14 is Scrolls and Biblical Stories. And so we're going to get into a little more meat. I will point them out, I'm sure, but man, there's some really drastically stark things that just jump out at me. And so you need to remember, this is a person, I believe, in the 80s, 90s, who is channeling something that's over 2,000 years old. And yet it's very amazing because many of the pieces that I've read actually verify what I've been sharing with you, that both is true and then on the other side what isn't true. And so I just hope you'll be blessed. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. There's a lot to learn here for all of us who are desirous to know about truth. Have many things coming in the future. If you'll recognize, all of these things are actually trying to expose you to the opposite picture that the one that Judaic Christianity has consumed you with, and that has to do with the things that have to do with eternal life and God and all of those things, which are unfortunately quite in error, most of them. And I only thought that the world of religion was big until I stepped away from Christianity, and then I found out that Christianity was actually very minuscule compared to the amount of worldwide knowledge that exists about many things like this. And so I hope that you also will be excited and will hear some things, and maybe it'll give you some food to think on and to meditate and to contemplate. Those are always wonderful traits. And so we usually come to Heart Center. Now, as we're teaching, the norm that we would learn to do here is not, you're not going to go everywhere and hear as let my light shine on you and your light shine on me. If you watched any of The Voice, you saw Snoop Dogg. He doesn't say any words. He just simply comes to Heart Center and he bows. He's doing the same process without the constant. My reasoning for doing that is because I wanted you to know why we do that. And so now we all, I think I could be very clearly, that we simply should just humble ourselves and bow to each other. When we're all together, of course, I'm going to put my hands down and go to Heart Center, and I hope you'll join me. That really is the message without having to say any words. And then, of course, the bowing has to do with humility. And so I think we need more of those things than we ever have before. If destruction goes before pride, I want the opposite of pride, and the opposite of pride is humility. And so that must mean blessing follows humility then, doesn't it? So let's just bow to each other, and we'll be good to go. It's a spirit thing anyways. The actions are to expose the feeling of the spirit. So we're in chapter 14, and there's a lot here, and I want to get into it because we probably won't finish this chapter, but in the event that we do, wonderful, all the better. So we jump off with Dolores' narrative. She says, one of the activities of the community was the writing and copying of scrolls. Now, I have it on good information that there's a lot of people that have read the Dead Sea Scrolls and thought that these were the only thing that guided the Essenes' life. And you'll get a little bit different revelation here that many of the scholars, and Saudi explains why, but many of the scholars have taken these writings to mean things that they may not necessarily, to put them in a context that they may not necessarily have originally been. And you'll see why this is such a glorious blessing, because this is from, if you can believe in this, it is somebody who is speaking from that day, not somebody who's speaking from now, speaking of that day. You see, there's a difference between somebody speaking in the day and somebody speaking about the day. And so this is an in the day. And so she says it was a publishing center, so to speak. So all the scrolls that were found at Qumran were all the ancient texts that they could get their hands on, and they did nothing but write them and 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 write them, and they shipped them all over the world. And so Saudi says to her, he says, we are put in charge of saving of records, so that word shall not be lost. It is what they do at the library. Then they take the scrolls and they are sent to many countries and many places for protection, in hopes that at least some of them will remain. There is so much here. There are all the stories, the communications of the different courts, the histories, the day-to-day life existence. One would be of a great age before you could read all of the scrolls. And Dolores asks, do you know where else in your world the scrolls are kept? Are there other libraries? And Saudi responds, he says, I suppose that there are. I have no way of knowing. The old suspicion returned. Why do you wish to know? And so Dolores says, I tried to fake my way through by saying I was curious and I like to read. If there was something they didn't have, I wanted to know where to look for it. My ruse did not convince him, and he asked, would you be able to read them? And I had to think fast. I told him if I could not, I could always have someone translate them for me. This did not work either. And so Saudi's response, very few are even allowed to see the scrolls. They must have reasons. So the word was not open to everyone. All of these things that I've shown you, whether it be James writing in the homilies, we have been massively deceived that this was open word for everyone. There were very few people who knew the ancient truths. It wasn't just shared with commoners. And so Dolores says, this surprised me because I thought anyone could look at them just as in our libraries today. And Saudi responds, the openers would want to know why. So you didn't get to look at them just because you wanted to. You had to have a reason. If everyone had this knowledge, they could use it for harm. And I would like to say to you, be very careful about what you think you know. If we understood many things, and as they start coming to light, there are many responsibilities that as an ignorant Christian you did not have. But that's not going to exist for you forever. You won't have an option to be ignorant anymore. And so during the sessions, there were many different references given to language spoken at the time. And I thought the majority spoke Aramaic. And Saudi says to her, no, they also speak Hebrew, Arabic, Egyptian, the language of the Romani. There are many, many different tongues. This reference to Romani surprised me because I knew that this was what the gypsies call their language today. And so Saudi says, they are the wanderers. Okay, that fits with the gypsies. It is said that they are two of the lost tribes of Israel. Now, there's a piece you never knew, did you? How true this is, I do not know. but it's obvious that they were present. And he also ties that to a bigger worldview. And so Dolores asked him, what do the Romans speak? And Saudi responds, Latin Vulgate, some of them Greek, both of which are true statements. There are also many dialects of Aramaic. From each little province you come, it is different. Each has its own way of expressing itself. My dialect is simple, I believe, Galilean. Saudi was unable to understand the other dialects, but at times it was able to understand the other dialects, but at times it was difficult. These differences also affected the reading of the Aramaic. So I used to hear a lot of contention in the Christian world, well, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the others argue that Jesus didn't speak Greek. The New Testament was written in Aramaic, and then it was converted from Hebrew or Aramaic into Greek. And now we could even be more confused because we have less surety about really what the truth. I think each individual writing was written by whatever language that writer seemed to function in. And then it would either be rewritten by them in other forms or given to someone who could read both languages and interpret. And so he says the Latin Vulgate, there are also many dialects of Aramaic. From each little province, it is different. So don't let anybody tell you, I suspect it's probable that it is right that he speaks Galilean, and I would suspect that that is also the dialect that Yeshua would have spoken. Being from Galilee, he would have spoken Galilean Aramaic. They can typically pretty easily jump from the different dialects because they're all an offshoot of Hebrew. And he kind of alludes to that here in a minute. And so Saudi was able to understand the other dialects, but at times it was difficult. These differences are also affected the reading of Aramaic. So now you're going to see another piece. All of these things are little pieces, pointers, flashing lights for you, synchronicities that the universe is telling you to wake your mind up. There is more to this than meets the eye. And so Saudi says, there are so many ways of expressing, and also the ways of writing are different. So now we have all of these dialects, and all of these dialects have their own uniqueness, as just as well as the spoken word as well as the written word. And so you can see how being a scholar would be a very intense job, because you have to not only know the language, you have to know the nuances. You have to know the context of it. And so he says there are so many ways of expressing, and also the ways of writing are different. Unless you are very familiar, you can read something in there that is absolutely not there. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that if this guy is sitting here telling us this from 2,000 years ago, would it be understandable to you how they very easily would have interpreted and translated whatever was written by the original authors, and it not say remotely close to what the author said it was? So when Paul says what Paul says, everything Paul says is metaphysical. And it makes you mad if you're a Hebrew Christian, because everything Paul says defies everything that the Torah says. In fact, many Christians have come to the conclusion, although they worship him like a god, many Christians also have come to the conclusion that Paul was a heretic and he wasn't a Christian. There's truth to that, because he was a Gnostic. And so we have interpreted many of his writings to the mind of Christianity, not to the truth of what it meant. And so he said, you see, it is like this. One word would mean one thing to me, and it could mean something totally different to you. So I could say hi, And that could mean, from me, that means hello, how are you? And from someone else, that word could have a completely different connotation. He said, you see, it is like this. One word would mean one thing to me, and it could mean something totally different to you. It depends on the way it is in the structure of the letter. Also, if it is spoken, it is the way the voice sounds when it is spoken. It can mean a good many things. There are several words that mean 5, 6, 7 meanings, and they are all different and diverse. So now you use one word and it's got 7 meanings, which is, we do have many of those in our language. Their definitions, we associated, the word never meant that, but we associated the meaning. One of the most glorious ones is the word grace. The word grace literally means to empower somebody to do something. When they say, may God's grace be with you, I was told that meant favor. The other interpretation is to have God's favor is a concrete thing, that I have a power to overcome, conquer, and accomplish something that I in and of myself could not do. So right there you already have 2 totally different meanings, and both are used all the time in Christianity, and the masses have no clue that what I just said to you is the truth. And so now you could imagine that where it goes to 5 or 6 words. And so he said it depends on the way it is in the structure of the letter. Also, if it is spoken, it is the way the voice sounds when it is spoken. It can mean a good many things. There are several words that have multiple meanings. They are all different and diverse. Same word, but the meanings are different and diverse. And so Doris says, this goes a long way along with the other session where he said it was the sounds and not the letters that make up the word. I see it as a type of shorthand where the symbols represent the sounds. If there were many different dialects, the word would have different sounds according to who spoke them. The person who was doing the writing would make the symbols according to the way he spoke the language. I asked an Iranian about this, and he said it was true in his language that the same word could have many completely different meanings. For instance, the same word means lion, faucet, and milk, each totally different. And I asked him how they knew which was the correct word. He said it depends upon the sentence it was used in. When you consider this plus the fact that pronunciation marks were not invented until the 15th century, it makes it clear what a nightmare the job of translating from these languages would have been. So think about this Iranian word that has these 3 meanings. So you could say, whatever the word is that is used there, you could say that, would you go to the corner store and get me and say the word? And if somebody knew the word but didn't understand the dialect, they might think you wanted them to go to the corner and get a lion, while what you really wanted them to do was to go get milk. There's a drastic difference between those 2. And if you don't know those nuances and you read it and to you the interpretation is lying, guess what you're going to do? You're going to say, oh, well, the prophet sent the man down to the corner to get a lion. And the prophet didn't send the man to the corner to get the lion. In context, he sent him down there to get some milk. He wanted some coffee. Do you see it? And so, as we begin to understand that, look at all of the different things then that become suspect and questionable, but Christianity and the Vatican tells you that none of this is questionable. You're somehow failed if you question. And I'd say that you can't actually know if what you know is the truth by not questioning. And so, until the 15th century, makes it clear what a nightmare of a job translating was. So Dolores asked Saudi, she says, then if someone was to read one of your scrolls, could they get something different out of it? Could it mean something totally different than what you know it to mean? And he said, it is very possible, yes, to find something totally different than what was intended. Wow. Did you hear what that just said? Even though the symbols were essentially the same, The reader could get a different story if they didn't know what dialect the scroll was written in. I wondered how anyone could ever know what the writer truly meant to say. And I think that she came to the right conclusion, and it's certainly the one I came to. Well, then how do we know? Now you begin to see why we have so many errors that are in the Bible. And as long as you believe that there are no errors in the Bible, the errors get washed away. And so he says, you would have to take it as a whole and find the way that the things fit together. So if I was in somebody's house and somebody says to me the words in Iranian that says whatever the lion and milk thing, and that person says that to me and I'm a stranger, and then I should stop and ask myself, well, does he want me to go get milk or does he want me to go get a lion? And of course, if you were in the presence, you would know that for some reason the baby wanted some cereal and they were out of milk. So you would then place that and go, okay, well, that word in this thing is milk. But if you didn't know that, you might get yourself in a lot of trouble.
The corner store don't sell lions.
Well, that might be true, but in their corner store, it may. So maybe the milkman is a lion keeper or something. But I think that you see the principle that we're talking about. That is tens of thousands of words. That's why it's so difficult in Hebrew, which is why they can't figure out the name, although they will tell you that it's not Yahweh, but don't say it anyways. Okay? Yahuwah works, Yahweh works, Yahweh works. It's Yod He Vav He, man. You go, and I've heard 1,000 people that are scholars go, well, how do we know what? Well, the answer is until the Jewish sages who heard the word or knew the word written, until they exposed that to you, you don't know. That's why you heard a week or so ago that we read that words are not truths. They're just images. They're pictures we try to paint about a meaning, about something that we otherwise have no way to share with other people. That's all they are. They're always fallible. And so, as he said, you would take it as a whole. Well, we do that now. Every one of you do that every day, all the time. You hear people say things and you go, that don't make no sense. Anybody besides me ever said that about somebody's statement? Well, that don't make no sense. And probably you're right. It didn't make any sense in the context you received it. To them, it probably made full sense. I know I see that go on a lot. And so, Dolores writes, this would explain why some of our stories in the Bible could be different from the original. Hello, is anybody's ears awake? Maybe this is why our stories in the Bible could be different from the original. If someone inserted a different word during the many translations down through history, it would be very difficult to know which way the story was originally supposed to be read. And for those of you who do not understand why I keep taking us back past Christianity if possible, it is because of that thing. The only way that we stand a chance of finding out what was really meant is by doing our due diligence as much as we can to find what was the original truth. And there is much original truth that exists. It's just typically intentionally hidden from the masses. They don't want you to know that you are light. Yeshua came and they killed him because he kept saying, you are the light, you are the light, you are the light, you are the light, and that threatened them. Us finding out as humans how wonderful, great, majestic, mighty, powerful, creative, and I could go on with the list of words that you are. But as long as you don't know that you are, you're not. It's that simple. No big deal. It's first grade mental manipulation. If I can make you not know who you are, you will never endeavor to find out and do anything with it. And as you just saw, these words that are hidden in Saudi's mind, because he did understand them, he was closer to knowing that he was light. He knew the power that exists in these words. Friends, if you don't see that, I'm sad for you. But it's really clear. We have been robbed on 1,000 different levels. And so Dolores says this would explain why so she's telling you, I already know information that you probably don't. If you can't pick that up in what she said, that's not a good thing. We should be learning how to grow mentally and start listening and hearing both what is said and what's not said. And so Dolores says to him, are some of your scrolls in Hebrew? And Saudi says, yes, they are in all of the languages of the earth. And Dolores says, are mistakes also made in Hebrew? And Saudi responds, yes, it is almost as easy in Hebrew as in Aramaic to make a mistake. The words have many meanings. So think about, you had to sit down and write a text and you had to put in proper context 5,000 words that you were writing with symbols with an ink quill. Do you think that there might be a time when your mind gets tired and your mind gets weak, or your eyes begin to hurt, or your butt hurts because you've been sitting on a rock for 9 hours without getting up? Do you think that it might be possible you could change the meaning of one sentence that would cataclysmically change the total writing? And I propose to you that the proper answer is nod your head and act spiritual. Hebrew uses letters, but they do not use vowels, only consonants. So many words are also possible, which is why I went through my little rhetorical thing about Yahweh's name. Dolores says, all this would make it very difficult on the scribe. If they made one mistake, they could change the whole story, even through simple ignorance. So all of this is not intentional. And you have to understand, you get 5 generations away from the original text, like 5 generations away from Moses, and you have nothing but only written by people. If there is a mistake in that story, that mistake's going to be carried till the next mistake is made, till the next mistake is made. And every time you retranslate, you bring on the understandings of the time of the translator. How did he interpret those words? And since we don't have them, and I wish Source would just open up some kind of supernatural heavenly, and underground there's an Alexandrian library that's spiritual, that people could walk in and see what the original text said and read them and be able to discern context and find out what our Creator, the source, what he really wanted from humanity, which I think that's already coming out. So that's why we don't have that, because it is going to come out. And so she asked Saudi, or fear. He says, I am not a scholar. I do not know of men's reasons for things. And so, of course, Josephus wrote with a bent towards the Romans because he was a Jewish defector, if you would, turncoat, treason, and he was adopted by the emperor of Rome and given much money and luxury to write, to twist the antiquities to look good or look better for the Romans than what the true picture was. Josephus is one of the only records that we have that is written by the hand of, that we know of, and yet even Josephus wrote with a special bent. So a Jew would read that and probably not hear what a Roman would hear. And so she says, with this information in mind, I will present Saudi's version of the stories from the scrolls and the Torah. Are y'all guys ready? I've been waiting for this. So with this information, all the information of words and all of that stuff, keep that in your mind. I will present Saudi's version of the scrolls from the Torah, scrolls and the Torah. There are many differences from our modern Bible. It must be remembered these are what he was taught by his teachers, so it is the truth as he saw it. But he was closer in time to the originals, so we really don't know whether his version is still, it may have just been the popular version for the time. Certainly a lot closer to even the time of Jeremiah than what we are. So, except them as food for thought. And so that's something that I tried to say the other day, and I'm not sure if I got through. I hope I did get through in simplicity. We're going to read many documents that are going to make you question lots of things, but here's the thing that I recognize all of us who desire to ascend, who desire to go higher, to desire to learn knowledge, we're going to have to learn how to learn. And many of you hear something, and I told somebody recently, I said, look, I'm not teaching you a new Bible, a new way to live. I'm not giving you a new set of dogma. I'm exposing to you truths that you have no idea even exist, and it's going to be up to you to learn how to look for the truth. There will be things that you won't agree with. Some of them will be right, and some will be wrong. And so, once again, you have to mature and learn how to discern what truth is. And you can only do discernment through the Spirit. So this really isn't something you're totally doing by yourself. It's something that you are working with the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, or just the Spirit of Source. And so Dolores says, we have a book today. He's speaking to Saudi again, outside of the narrative. She says to him, we have a book today that has some of your teachings in it, but it is supposed to have been written by many different people. They have names for the different parts of the book. One of them is called Isaiah. And so now we'll see Saudi's response. This is so cool. He says, yes, there is the prophet Isaiah. You are saying book. It is not a book. It is part of the Torah. There's something you didn't know. It speaks of the prophet Isaiah, and there is Ezekiel and Deborah and Benjamin and the story of Moses and Ruth and many, many others. Dolores writes, Deborah was one Bible character I was not familiar with. It is the part about the judges of Israel. She was one of these. She was one of the lawgivers. For the Israelis to have a woman over them was something of an unusual occurrence, and many of them could not stand the fact that they were being ruled by women. She was a very wise person. Her story is not part of the Torah. It is in some of the scrolls. That's how we got the story of Deborah. And so in the Bible, Deborah is barely mentioned in the 4th and the 5th chapters of Judges, and that's all. And so I asked if he had ever heard of one part called Genesis. But he was not familiar with that name. Of course, had she said to him Bereshith, he would have understood. Genesis would be more of a Western interpretation of Genesis. Of Bereshith. And so when I explained that it told of how the world was formed, he said, you mean the foundation. It is just the beginning. He also did not recognize the name Exodus. Oh, really? But they had the story of Moses. It was very important to them. I am unfamiliar with the Torah that is used today in the Jewish religion, but I asked him which parts were included in his. And this is what he says. This was the Torah of Saudi. He says, the Torah, it consists of the laws and the prophecies. Prophecies don't exist in the Torah in our time. And then basically, oh, this is so cool. And then basically from the time of Abraham. So you know what that means, right? Their Torah started at about chapter 26 of the book of Genesis. The rest of that, where did those 26 chapters come from? You might be surprised at what the truth is. He said there is very little of what went before. So this isn't someone who hasn't read. This is someone who has studied these scriptures, the Torah. He told you, I am a student of the Torah his whole lifetime. And there's very little said in the Torah that they had that said anything before the life of Abraham. Wow, that's pretty huge, folks. You recognize that pretty much cleans out the flood narrative, other than the flood narrative that I showed you that was going on all over the world. Everybody had some flood story. And so he says, but not in the Torah. It begins with the point of the creating about Abraham and that he is the leader of the people of Israel, and it goes on from there. Wow, that's just crazy huge. You just saw some of the things that I told you about when I came to that understanding and conclusion that what we were being fed is the Old Testament is, well, I'll just be really kind tonight and say, it ain't trustworthy. And so it goes from there. And then she asked him, does it end with the stories of Moses? No, it ends with the prophets. Some of them are in the Torah. Some of them are just in the other scrolls. So there were some of the prophets who were part of the Torah and some of the prophets who were just standalone prophets but not part of the Torah. But it is the work of putting them together. I'm trying to fit everything together of the promises. So he was working, his life journey of knowledge was working to put together all of the writings of the promises, which we all need to know the promises that Source has given to us. And so Dolores asked, who is the last prophet in the Torah? And he says, let me think. I believe Zechariah. I thought it would be easier if all of the stories were in one scroll. His answer caused laughter amongst the listening group. Saudi says, if they were all on one scroll, that would be a very large scroll. It would be too big to lift. So does that give you the idea that there must then be a lot of information? I think you probably could carry in your arm like this 8 or 10 scrolls that would make up all that we have as a New Testament. So how many of those scrolls that he's talking about that he accessed, that they may have all accessed, how many of those scrolls did they have that don't even exist and we've never heard a word about them? Or even the Jews. There was a lot of stuff that was lost, friend. I mean, they have fragments by the millions, but it's really hard to read a complete writing when it's nothing but fragments. And so she writes, we stumbled upon his ability to tell stories quite by accident. It had never occurred to me to ask Saudi for information of this type. The following stories were originally sprinkled throughout the transcript. So now she's explaining to you. The following stories were originally sprinkled throughout the transcripts and appeared over the 3-month period at random. So she would been writing these down, and she gets the book. That's the way she liked to study. She got the book written, and then she researched everything and updated everything according to the research. If there was something, she answered it. If there was an issue, she answers it. And that's to try to keep some kind of purity. And so the following stories were originally sprinkled throughout the transcripts and appeared over the 3-month period at random. I have combined them in this section for reading out of context. Since it is a known fact that our Bible has undergone many changes down through the year, there may be more of the truth here than we would like to admit. At least read them with an open mind. So once again, it's up to you to be clicking and in line and in agreement with Source for Source to help you know through intuition and psychic ability what you can believe and what you can't, what is right and what is wrong. Sometimes it's a twinge inside and you know that's not right, but sometimes you get a twinge and you know it's right, even if everybody else doesn't. And so I was asking him questions about the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Death as he called it. The Qumran community was located on the cliffs at the edge of this body of water. All I have ever heard about it was that it was very salty and it would not sustain life. This peculiarity has never really been satisfactorily explained as to why this phenomena exists there. With this in mind, I asked if the sea had any peculiarities about it. I was taken off guard by his answer. And so here we go, friends. Yet again, just one of the many blessings you'll receive tonight. So Saudi says, it has sometimes the smell of tar or resin or pitch. Yes, the peculiarity. They say that towards the south there are pits of pitch and that this is part of it. Also, nothing grows in the Sea of Death. There are a few plants along the edges. So Dolores asked him, she says, is this why you call it the Sea of Death? And Saudi responds, it is called this because it is upon these shores that Gomorrah and Sodom were brought to destruction. This was really mind-boggling. And it is to remind us of this. Okay? So for you it means nothing, but to them it has significance. I glanced quickly at Harriet and saw she was as surprised as I was. This was certainly unexpected. We had heard the Bible story, but had no idea these two infamous cities were associated with the Dead Sea. Note the reversal of the names as we are accustomed to hearing them in the different pronunciation of Sidom. It was obvious none of this came telepathically from our minds. Once again, she was such a good heart because she never wanted to do things corruptly. She didn't want to stand there and narrate, so she understands the power that functions in us. I believe if she had chosen to, she had the mental capacity to look at you and place a thought in your mind, and you would think it was your thought, and she had planted it there. We all have that power, but very few have ever explored it. And so Dolores asked him, oh, we've always thought the name meant that nothing would grow there. Saudi interrupted. That is why nothing grows here. Did you get the difference there? She thought it was because of the salt sea that it's called the Sea of Death. He says no, it's because of what went on there that it's called the Sea of Death. That's huge. So he says, that is why nothing grows here. And Dolores says, how were these cities destroyed? Should blow you away too. Saudi answered nonchalantly, radiation. Are you guys hearing me? Friends, when I tell you that we've been lied to, you ain't got a clue about what I'm talking about. I think very soon you're going to begin to find out that we are not of this earth at all. Saudi answers nonchalantly, radiation. Again, I was taken off guard and I asked if he could tell us the story of what happened. So now we're going to get the Sodom and Gomorrah story, and I promise you, it ain't what you've learned. Saudi says, it is said that they were displeasing in the eyes of Yahweh. Well, that's the same. For they had gone from the path of truth. Okay? You understand whether you're in total debauchery or whether you've turned aside from the path of truth, in Source's eyes, you still have turned aside. That's why it's hard for people to understand why somebody who's really bad doesn't get more than somebody who's just bad. All bad is bad. The rest is just a timeline of degree. Exactly like I showed you in the Kabbalion. That principle, everything in life exists on that principle. And once you begin to learn and use those things I lovingly shared as knowledge to you, you'll begin to look at the world differently. And so he says, it is said that they were displeasing in the eyes of Yahweh, for they had gone from the path of truth. And when they were given the warning many times to become back to the path of righteousness, wasn't back to Christianity, the path that had been turned aside was righteousness. And you got to see that. That they laughed. And it was said that Lot was in these cities and he was visited by two great beings. Listen to the difference in concept. If you read what you get in your Bible, two great beings, in my mind now, has a totally different meaning than what I read in Christianity. Because those two great beings are the same great beings that have come down on this earth so many times it's not even funny. They were two beings from somewhere other than this earth, who told him to take his family and leave, and they would be protected. And he was upset because, this was his city after all. And even though it was still bad, these were his people. So there is a difference in narrative of perspective and context. Lot says, I don't want to leave. This is my home. Thank you. And if they rape my daughter, we just make sure we get inside before it gets dark at night. And so, if you leave, you will be protected. And he was upset because, this was his city after all. And even though it was still bad, these were his people. But they told him they were not worth saving, that they must start over and start again from anew. What does that narrative sound like? Is it common that we see cycles and duplicity in source? Everything is a cycle. Everything goes round. The moon goes round, the earth goes round, the sun goes round. What you do goes round. What you sow goes round. Everything is a cycle. And so the earth isn't exempt from that. If we don't take care of the earth gets sick and vomits humans off and kills us, whether it be through extinctions, whether it be through, whatever is the situation that the remedy that needs to be applied by source to this earth. It is not free from those laws. And so, but they told him that they were not worth saving, that they must start over and start again from anew. So he took his two daughters and his wife, and they left. It is said that his wife looked back on the city, and in so doing so, that she died from what she saw, and looking upon the face of the destruction with her eyes. Now, you will notice up till that point what's missing there. What were you taught your whole life if you're talking about Lot's wife? What do you think? And yet you notice it's not there. I remembered the familiar story of her turning into a pillar of salt, but Saudi said there was nothing unusual about her death other than she looked back and saw the destruction. So that did not exist in his day, of this whole pillar of salt thing. And I asked if he had an explanation for the destruction. Saudi responds, where these cities were located, there are pockets of the pitch and the tar, and a great heat was caused. The lightning bolts they struck from the heavens. And when they hit this, they caused destruction to rain. Dolores writes in parentheses, or could this word be rain, R-A-I-N. An interesting difference in definition. And it caused to explode, and the cities, they caved in about this themselves and sunk until there was nothing left. Then you think that Yahweh, she asked, Dolores asked, then you think that Yahweh caused all this to happen? And Saudi responds, it was his choice, yes. This was something I could not delay research on. He had sparked my curiosity. I did not see that it would jeopardize the story of the Essenes if I looked for information about Sodom and Gomorrah. Some of the best was readily available in my encyclopedia. The thing to remember is that we had no interest in looking it up before, and we had never thought of a connection. Archaeological and biblical evidence supports the locating of the 5 cities of the plain, of which Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 in the valley of Shittim. This was a once fertile plain located at the south end of the Jordan River Dead Sea Valley. And you can hear a term, and it's probably still used, of the Jordan River Valley. So in that way, it was associated to something that exists later in biblical writing. The early invaders of the area found that the valley was full of wells of asphalt, slime pits in the older translations. Ancient and modern writers attest to the presence of asphalt, Greek, and bitumen, Latin, around the Dead Sea, especially around the southern part. In ancient times, it was called the Salt Sea or Lake Asphaltitis. At the southwest corner rises a low mountain made up in part of pure compact crystalline salt, which the modern Arabs call Jebel Uzdim, the Mount of Sidon. And so recent investigations by geologists have revealed the presence of petroleum as well as seepage of asphalt. They also suspect the presence of uranium, but they feel it would be too difficult to mine. Ancient writers wrote of the foul odors and the soot arising from the sea. It was so strong that it tarnished metals. Modern geologists say that this is natural gas which would have been unknown to the people of the past. They claim a possible explanation, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is that oil and the gas fumes may have been ignited by lightning or an earthquake or overturned the hearth fires, causing an explosion. In the Bible, it says that Abraham saw smoke rising from the plain, which went up as the smoke of a furnace, a fitting description of burning oil and gas. And it could also fit an atomic explosion. But there's some more that goes with this make this huge, because now the picture totally changes for me about everything. So the surface of the Dead Sea, which is 1,292 feet below sea level. So if you go almost 1,300 feet from sea level down, that's how far you have to go to get to the bottom of the Dead Sea. And it is lower than any known place on earth. The sea then drops to a maximum depth of 1,309 feet and is 6 times saltier than seawater, making it also the saltiest place on earth. This is a unique geological phenomena. No other part of the globe which is not underwater lies deeper than 300 foot below sea level. Absolutely nothing will live in the water. According to Wimmer Kelleran, the Bible is history. Explorations in that area came up with something strange. Although the body of the sea is incredibly deep, the south end is shallow, no more than 50 or 60 feet. So this thing is kind of like this. Okay? No more than 50, from 1,300 feet to 60 foot. When the sun is shining in the right direction, the outlines of forests can be seen beneath the water. They have been preserved by the high salt content of the water. This is evidence that before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the area was a lush and fertile plain. It is believed that the cities sank beneath the water in this area, and this would explain why it is shallow there. Salt is in the air, and everything in the area, including people, is quickly covered with a crust of salt. This could be an explanation for the story of Lot's wife turning into salt. When the explosion occurred, there must have been a tremendous amount of salt thrown into the air from the salt mountain located near the cities. I would like to venture to draw my own conclusions as to what happened there. In order for the cities to sink and the area to be rendered lifeless and desolate for all time to come, I believe a natural atomic explosion occurred. Could this also account for the incredible depth of the sea? It is possible with the presence of uranium as well as the other highly volatile chemicals in the area. It is interesting to note that no Geiger counter readings for radioactivity have ever been carried out in the area, according to the writer Erich von Daniken. And so you can go see Erich. He's written many books, and he researches all the time. And so, but this does not explain the presence of two beings who came to warn Lot and his family. If it was a natural phenomenon, how did they know about it in advance? It has been suggested that instead of lightning triggering the explosion, it may have been ignited by laser beams from an outer space craft. It's coming out. It's all over the place, friend. Spacecraft are written about so much in ancient writing, it's not even funny. And that goes back 17,000 years. It's in every culture that exists. They saw beings from, these aren't stupid people. These people saw something real. If it was a natural phenomenon, how did they know about it in advance? It has been suggested that instead of lightning triggering the explosion, it may have been ignited by laser beams from an outer space craft. An open mind can see many possibilities other than the orthodox. A new area of exploring this time period has opened up. Maybe Saudi can give us more stories and open up new avenues of thinking. Daniel. When I asked about the story of the fiery furnace, he said he was not familiar with it. So I asked him if he knew one about someone being thrown into a den of lions. And let's see what Saudi's response about. This is about Daniel. Saudi says, "You speak of Daniel. His story is in the scrolls. He was a wise man and a prophet. The people were afraid of his influence with the king because he was Jewish and did not believe as they did. They had him thrown to the lions, and so when he came out alive, they were fearful, for they knew that his God was the true God. It is said that the angel came and shut the lion's mouth. I rather think that Daniel spoke to the lions. This is possible. Man can have shared conversation with animals. Are they not God's creatures also? You do remember there is a place in the scripture where it actually tells us that we will once again converse with animals. David. Saudi told me once that he was descended from the house of David. So I asked if he had heard of a story about David that involved a giant. Saudi. You speak of Goliath. It is said that Goliath was the head of the army of, I believe it was the Philistines, and the people, let me think, who was the king? I believe it was Saul who was king, and they were at war, and every day the Israeli army would go out and be defeated, and many men would die because of this leader Goliath. He would go out and he would challenge them all and would win. Dolores asked him, was he really giant? And Sadi responds, he was larger than most men would be considered. He was with the Philistines, but he was not a Philistine. So far, all of those things, as far as the Bible says, are true. In other words, he was of somewhere else. And it is said that David decided that he would take him on and would slay him, and he did. 'Tis said that he used his sling, that he was a shepherd and had much prowess with it, killing wolves. It keeps the wolves and jackals away from the sheep if you are a good shot, so you do not lose many lambs. David was just from the threshold of manhood. I believe he was 14. It was something that he had been told that he would be able to do. It is not hard to defeat someone like that when you are in the right and they are in the wrong. In the case of that, it is better to slay one man to stop killing than to let one man kill so many. So it is written. And I think we'll stop right there. Each and every one of these things, you see how pieces of it, it sounds familiar, but every one of them has a nuance, a thought, a context, a direction, maybe something that doesn't exist. I think we have a lot better understanding, or you should have, that the picture wasn't as poetically perfect of Lot as what we were told. You notice that if they were going to talk about the prophet Daniel, they would talk about all of the big things that Daniel did. But you notice that there was nothing else that was said about him other than the fact that he had gone in and the lion's mouth, however, had been stayed. So I hope you guys are blessed, man. It's happening everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Truth is everywhere. Truth is. Truth is. And so I think that you'll begin, if you open your heart and your mind, you will begin to see that there is a truth, but it really is up to us to decide to do the work necessary to find it. And if, unfortunately, because it sounds harsh, but if you're not interested in doing the work to find it, I hate to tell you, you never will. I hope you guys have peace and a wonderful week. Take some of these beautiful, amazing things and enjoy life and live life. You are great. You are wonderful. You are bright, but you're also struggling with your humanity. And we need to get that humanity under control so that we can shine like the noonday sun. Shalom to each and every one of you. Hope you have an amazing week. If Source allows us, we'll be back on Saturday at 2 o'clock, and hopefully we will share more truth, different perspectives maybe than you have. But I think if you'll open your heart and mind and look, you will begin to see that the universe is telling us that this is not right. It's just up to us to do the work. Shalom.